this to the organizers if I did not share with you the takeaways I have formulated from this significant conference. First, cross-regional is not only necessary, but vital. Second, for cross-regional security linkages to be sustainable, you need firm international, global governance and architecture. Fourth, there is a common understanding of the individual, regional, and common threats and challenges that we all face being security practitioners. And fourth, there are major players that uphold and are significant pillars of the international global rules-based order. And disengagement by any of them would be disastrous for the preservation of peace in areas where there is a condition of peace, and conflict resolution in areas where there is conflict. So I echo the Deputy Prime Minister's words and Dobile's words that we are all interconnected and we must advocate and use our leadership in order to foster connectivity, call out bad behavior, and work together towards working for tangible outcomes in all our talks, as our host, Minister Chan, said. I'll now proceed. In last year's dialogue, President Ferdinand R. Marcos delivered a historic keynote address where he spoke in defense of the rules-based international order. As he aptly put it, for the past 80 years, this rules-based order has allowed our region to flourish. The stability and predictability that it has engendered have been crucial to the success of the stories of our region, be it the post-war revival of Japan, the economic miracles of Korea and in Southeast Asia, or the rise of China and of India. His words are more relevant in this conference today, following the speeches of President Macron and of Secretary Hegseth. However, we are witnessing the reconfiguration of our global environment, including the political and economic arrangements that emerged after the Second World War. In our interdependent world, ruptures in the international system, wherever they occur, threaten the very security and prosperity of our people. Thus, this topic, it is an honor for me to address. In an era marked by uncertainty, the diffusion of power, and technological disruption, no single region can be viewed in isolation. From the Indo-Pacific to Eastern Europe, from the Middle East to the Arctic, today's security environment is shaped by interlocking dynamics that transcend traditional regional boundaries. Over the last decade, several cross-regional trends have impacted the security of the Philippines and the outlook of Southeast Asia. In 1974, Deng Xiaoping told the UN General Assembly, and I quote, that China is not a superpower, nor will she ever seek to be one, unquote. Over half a century later, it is evident that the Chinese government did not honor Deng Xiaoping's commitment. And the strategic competition between China and the United States increasingly defines our regional and global security environment. However, we must not overemphasize this reality. Doing so unfairly portrays the legitimate actions taken by smaller states, carried out as being carried out at the behest of major powers, as if we were mere pawns with no strategic agency of our own. In that spirit, I would like to reiterate that the Philippine position on the West Philippine Sea is not a function of Sino-American strategic rivalry. Instead, it is caused, no doubt, by the overreach of the Chinese Communist Party, of which the most glaring evidence is the 9, 10, or 11 dash line that has absolutely no basis in international law. Russia's actions in Ukraine and Israel's operation in Gaza have rippled across the commodity and energy markets of Asia. Hence, the consequences of conflicts abroad are felt at home and borne disproportionately by the most vulnerable. Increases in the cost of food affect cash-strapped families, worsening poverty and food insecurity. Spikes in fuel prices impact critical sectors such as agriculture, domestic shipping, and manufacturing. In this context, multilateral institutions have been facing unprecedented scrutiny and at times met with skepticism and frustration for their difficulties in defending international peace and security. The mechanisms and norms of the United Nations have been used to block legitimate measures aimed at preventing acts of aggression and restoring regional order. This highlights the need for a Security Council that is fit for purpose for contemporary geopolitical realities. We have seen an evolution from rigid alliance blocks to flexible issue and needs-based groupings. The shift is exemplified by the Quad, the Security Quad, the AUKUS, as well as the European Union and its outreach to the Indo-Pacific. Such frameworks link geographically distant partners with shared strategic interests, including maritime security, cyber resilience, and the defense of the all-important supply chains. These developments are driven by gridlocks in the decision-making of multilateral organizations, their slow pace of reforms, and their perceived inability to promote cooperation on the most pressing issues confronting their members. Indeed, criticism has been leveled even against ASEAN for its muted response to the illegal activities in the South China Sea. The Bab el-Mandeb, Suez Canal, and the South China Sea issues, to name a few, are not just regional. They are arteries of the global economy. Disruption in any of these maritime corridors triggers ripple effects across continents, impacting trade flows, military deployments, and diplomatic posture. The Philippines has migration and mobility linkages in these choke points. Over 1 million Filipinos are living and working in the Middle East and North Africa. Thus, instability in those regions pose risks to their lives, their safety and livelihoods. Our seafarers, in particular, are vulnerable to piracy and armed robbery at sea, be it in the Red Sea or in the Horn of Africa. Therefore, the safety of our citizens, wherever they may be, is among our utmost priorities. Technological development signifies progress, undoubtedly. Second, we must pursue reforms in the United Nations. There is a need to curtail the use of the inordinate use of the veto, as its exercise may serve to be a hindrance to the interests of smaller states, especially those besieged by larger ones, who may have the power of the veto. Beyond the veto, we support broader reforms to the Security Council, including enlarging its membership for greater representation in the UN system. For our part, we will continue advocating for constructive solutions if the Philippines is elected as a non-permanent member for the term of 2027 to 2028. President Xi Jinping has declared that, quote, China must lead the reform of the global governance system with concepts of fairness and justice, unquote. However, what the Chinese government considers fair and just may stand in stark contrast to the norms and values accepted by the rest of the world, especially the smaller countries. To envision a China-led international order, we only need to look at how they treat their much smaller neighbors in the South China Sea, which runs counter to the, quote, peaceful rise they, unquote, they initially promised. Last year, the Philippines hosted the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction with delegations from nearly 70 countries, including those from Europe, the Middle East, the North America, and South America. This demonstrates that in certain issues, the international community can still and do come back together to tackle challenges that respect neither borders nor boundaries. So there is hope. Just last month, we attended the UN Peacekeeping Ministerial, where we pledged to increase our contributions to peacekeeping missions to foster just and sustainable peace across the world. Ultimately, multilateral solutions are required to address global challenges, including climate change, nuclear non-proliferation, and the protection of the rights of migrants and seafarers. Thus, amidst a growing disillusionment, some sectors with multilateralism, we can and we must reverse course. Before I close, there is an issue we need to address. We are all here as stewards of our country's provenance and our country's collective responsibility towards maintaining global peace and security. I was just talking to future youth leaders. However, we must realize that the gap between the educated and the uneducated is widening in the world. And countries need to address this gap because a populace which is unable to perceive the benefits of multilateralism, that lose the facility of critical thinking, are easy bait for one-liners, disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda, which may run counter to general peace and stability of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of a global transformation. Still, we must ensure that our international system, however it evolves, remains grounded in the rule of law, the undistorted rule of law, particularly the United Nations Charter, which respects the political independence, territorial integrity, and notional sovereign equality of all states. Evidently, this system has not always functioned well. However, for all its shortcomings, there is no preferable alternative to the rules-based order, especially for the security, prosperity, and survival of smaller states like the Philippines. Thank you and good morning.